All right, well, welcome to Impact Live with Impact Disciple Making Ministries. We're so glad that you're here with us this morning and super excited about what we're going to be talking about. I want to say a quick shout out to those of you who've returned. Thanks for coming, and we hope that you continue to really learn and develop in this area of disciple making. If you're brand new, man, thanks for coming. We're so excited that you're a part of this conversation. And we want to encourage you to like us down there with the little thumbprint there, just to push that button and say like, because that helps us know that we're really helping them with some good content and some information. My name is Glenn Underhill. I'm the executive pastor here at Crossroads Church in Newton, Georgia. And joining with me is Pastor Ken, who's the lead pastor. And I know you're excited about being here.
Yeah, I really am. And you know what? I just think this whole, we just started this a few months ago, this whole Facebook Live thing, and I just love the idea that we can just share what we're learning. We haven't figured anything out yet, but we are learning, and so I think it's great to be able to have this kind of an opportunity to connect with other folks that really have a heart for seeing the church make disciples, and so we're just trying to share on a monthly basis, really and truly, just not long, seminars, but just little nuggets of things that we're learning. A lot of times it ties into some of the stuff that we're doing. But anyway, it is great to do this and to be able to, if we're helping folks, man, it's great to know that, because we want to, we don't want to waste anybody's time. And so, we're excited about today's topic as well.
I know your heart, as well as mine, is we want to leverage the influence that God's given us in this area of disciple making and things that we're learning. So I know the last couple of times we've met, we talked about one of the important things in creating a culture of disciple making is this whole idea of the target. Got to know what you're aiming at. And we talked about this whole idea of being a fully trained disciple.
Right.
And kind of unpack that a little bit. And then we also then turned around the next time and we talked about the strategy. That there's a strategy involved in making a fully trained disciple. It doesn't just happen, and just really have to be intentional in that process.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we looked at it, though, in the context of disciple making through the life of Jesus.
Right.
This is a model for our life and ministry.
Right.
So today, what we thought we'd talk about is this idea that it's important about the environments that you develop from that strategy to create the right environments to help disciple making take place.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to go back to what you said, because it's important to underline that Jesus is our model. Mm-hmm. That's so important, because if you go back and you look at the greatest disciple maker that ever lived, it was Jesus. And when Jesus started his ministry, when he began his mission and his movement, here's what we know, is that he did have a clearly defined target. That was that fully trained disciple. He identified a handful of individuals, poured his life into them intentionally to help them to become a certain type of person. He had a clearly defined target, and then he had an intentional strategy to do that. And a part of that strategy was creating environments. I mean, think of it like this. We talk about this all the time, that Jesus' strategy was literally, he took a handful of untrained, ordinary men. They weren't the most gifted, they weren't the most educated, they weren't the most well-trained. In fact, they were just fishermen, He took untrained, ordinary men, and he turned them into fully trained disciples that could, after he left, lead his mission and lead the movement of Christianity, disciple-making movement. And so we always got to go back and underline that this is the model and the method that Jesus used. And so that's the beauty of it. That's what makes it powerful. And so, as we said, environments were key. And what Jesus did is that Jesus drove the disciple-making strategy through environments that accomplished the target.
Right.
And so Jesus literally took a handful of individuals, poured right at 3 years of his life into them, and it so changed their lives that in turn they end up changing the world. They end up impacting the world. We're going to be doing the same thing today.
Well, even Acts records the fact that within a year after Jesus resurrected, we're told that the entire of all Jerusalem was filled with his teaching.
Yeah.
And that in Acts 19, that Asia was You go like 4.5, or actually 19 years later, it talks about the fact that all of Asia had heard the gospel.
Yeah.
And then in Colossians, the whole known world within 28 years had heard the gospel of the good news.
And Glenn, for most New Testament teachers will say that the church grew to about 100,000 to 150,000 people in a town of between 200 and 250,000 people. So literally, in a short period of time, in about 3 decades, the city of Jerusalem and beyond, ultimately the message had been proclaimed to really all the known world. That's amazing.
It's powerful. And so, again, it goes back to this idea, target, strategy, and environment.
Exactly.
And so let's unpack that just a little bit, because I know over the course of the next several months, we're going to be really diving into each of these areas.
Right.
But let's just kind of give an overview of them as we're getting ready to talk about it. So we kind of call it here at Crossroads 4 C's to creating an intentional environment.
Right.
So let's just kind of unpack just real quickly each of those. So what's the first one?
Yeah. So Jesus, one of the very first things he did with the men that he was impacting and he was influencing is that he gave them content. All right. And we like to call it content, but there are a lot of different words for it. You could say that he gave his disciples information. You could say he gave them teaching. You could say that he gave them truth. There's a lot of different words that we use because Jesus was that.
Right.
So being with them gave them truth, and so it gave them information. In fact, listen to what it says here in Mark chapter 1, verse 22. Here's what it says: the people were amazed at his teaching because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law. Now, if that doesn't say content, I don't know what does.
Right.
Absolutely. Because what it tells us is that Jesus was it wasn't just randomly walking around sort of unintentionally connecting with people. He was strategically giving them not everything they could know, but he gave them everything they needed to know. We live in this culture nowadays, Glenn, where we're kind of information crazy, and what's really kind of sad is that we don't do we have more information than we're living in obedience to,
That's right.
And so we keep wanting more and more information, not even using what we have the way we're supposed to. So Jesus did not give them. He didn't answer every theological question. But here's what he did do, is that he equipped them and he prepared them with just the right amount of information so that they could go out and they could accomplish the mission of making disciples. And they did.
They applied it.
They did.
Took that information, the right information, and it really changed who they were.
Absolutely.
Because the truth always changes.
Yeah.
The Word of God, the truth, the right information is what will change us and transform us.
And the information, the content, is important because part of the way that we learn is by what we hear, which is why it is so important that we are a part of a large group where God's Word is being taught, where we're part of a small group where God's Word is being taught and discussed. And so not all, but one piece of the environment for making disciples involves the right information. Next time we do a live, we're going to unpack really what makes good content.
Take a deep dive into
Absolutely.
that. Yeah. So that's the first one, content. What's the second one?
So the second thing is that we would say it's contact. All right, and so contact is really all about relationship. Right, it's just all about spending time together. And so contact is not necessarily something that you do in a group. Whether you're meeting in a church or in a home or whether you're in a restaurant or whatever, it's what you do in between time. So you might meet for an hour a week or an hour and a half a week, but that's not the only time you should be influencing those that you're discipling. So good example is a verse in Mark chapter 6, verse 1. Let me just read it. It says that Jesus left there and he went to his hometown. Now that doesn't sound like anything transformational, but then it says accompanied by his disciples. So here's the point. So they weren't, this verse, Jesus wasn't teaching them anything. He wasn't showing them anything. He wasn't modeling them anything particular. He was just traveling home. He was just going to his hometown. They were walking together. The key is they were together. So imagine how many things the disciples learned from Jesus that changed their character and their conduct, not because of something that Jesus said, but because of something that he did, that they witnessed.
Yeah. And that's powerful.
It is
because,
powerful.
Here they are, they're hearing him teach, obviously, and information, and then they're watching him definitely putting what he was encouraging them, what he was teaching them, they were watching him put it into practice.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, that only elevates transformation.
Yeah. And think about this too. Think about all the things that, they did together while they were just traveling and they were just in, we see the highlights almost like a highlight reel of the miracles and the things that Jesus did and said. But they were with him, 24/7. And so they laughed together, they joked together, they experienced life together. And when we intentionally spend time with the people that we're pouring our lives into, outside of the group, we're doing life together. And I'm just convinced that a lot of disciple making happens in the doing life together times as much as they do in the group times. And so we got to have content, but we also got to have contact.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's imperative.
And we'll unpack some real practical ways that can happen.
Yeah.
when we look at this one too.
Yeah.
So what's the third one?
So we start with content, contact, and then is what we call context. And context is literally ministry training. It's actually getting past just the teaching time and the relational time. It's doing ministry together. We would call it, hands-on, or we would call it, practical application is what we call hands-on ministry training is what we call it. In fact, there's a cool passage here in Mark chapter 2, verse 15. It says, while Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. So what's really cool here is that Jesus is spending time with Levi, Matthew, who is far from God, and he's doing this intentionally to try to reach him with the gospel, with the truth. And so while he's there in that house with all these tax collectors, he's also got his disciples right alongside him. So they are literally watching him, learning from him by being with him in an environment of ministry.
That's so good.
Yeah.
It's on-the-job training.
It is,
It's just,
absolutely.
and that's that whole idea of Morse caught and taught. Is they're having a way to practically apply what they're learning and what they're watching and observing.
Yeah.
Then they get the context of that inside that on-the-job learning, which is so good, so rich.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And you think about this, when you take somebody that you're discipling outside of the group and outside of just fellowship time, and you take them somewhere where you are sharing your faith with somebody or visiting somebody that's sick in a hospital room, or you're doing an outreach project together, mission trip, here's what you're doing, is that you are giving them on-the-job training. I love the way you said that. And you're giving them on-the-job training, and you're teaching them. Jesus called them to be fishers of men. The best way to learn to fish is to go fishing. And that's what Jesus did. He gave them content because we learn by what we hear.
Right.
He gave them contact because we learn by what we see. But he also gave them context because we learn by what we do. Right. You got to be involved.
So what's the last one?
So the last one is correction, right? And so Jesus created a small group environment so that he could actually have an opportunity to speak into these unschooled ordinary men and help them literally become fully trained disciples, and that happens through correction in our lives, really being transformed into the image of Christ. That's what his goal was. And so here's a great example. In Mark chapter 9, they were on their way to Capernaum, and he was in the house, and he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" And they kept quiet because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. So even Jesus' own disciples were dysfunctional.
Right.
Even his own disciples had areas that needed to be corrected and needed to be transformed. There's a bunch of different examples. Sometimes Jesus would say, "Man, where's your faith? You guys have so little faith." And then sometimes when they were arguing with each other, or sometimes when little children were coming to Jesus, they were trying to get rid of him. He said, whoa, you guys, don't do that. At times, in his greatest hour of need, his key leader denies him.
Mm-hmm.
So a part of becoming a fully trained disciple is not just more information, and it's not just more application, it's not just more relationship. Sometimes it means somebody giving them loving correction in their life. It's that balance of grace and truth.
Right, and I was just sitting here thinking, content, contact, context, correction. As a disciple maker, you earn kind of the right to speak into someone's life, because you're pouring yourself into them, and it gives you that opportunity to say, hey, what I see isn't lining up with the right information. Right. It's not, there's some misalignment and some of those things, and the intent is not for your harm, but for the good of them and the mission.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're so spot on, because what it did is the fact that they were in community gave Jesus the relational currency to be able to help bring correction into their lives. He earned the right to be heard.
Well, I hope that these have been helpful just in kind of introducing them, these 4 C's that we like to call them: content, contact, context, correction. And like we said, over the next few months, we're going to be unpacking, taking a deeper dive into each of them. But we also want to talk about, real quickly, some tools that we have available, because we believe that tools are really important. They're not an end, they're the means to the end. And we have some field-tested tools we've been using. I know you might have a little bit more to say about some of those tools.
Yeah, and the curriculum is helpful. It's not it's not the end all, but we have, over the years, we have tried to develop curriculum that helps drive those environments, that produces the right target. And so we've developed a whole series of courses. We call them essentials, discipleship essentials. And so they literally kind of unfold what does it mean to be a fully trained disciple, and how does that strategy work, and how do those environments work. And so we use those booklets and those courses as a part of that training. And if you contact us at Impact Ministries, we can get you a sample pack. You can check them out. And then we have also developed a leadership tool, so that we're developing leaders for multiply groups that we call 315 leadership. And we'll go deeper in both of these later, but you can get both of those resources. And the resources kind of help guide you into creating those environments that you're trying to do.
And I believe this with all my heart, that having the right tools is important for creating a very intentional disciple-making process. I firmly believe that, because right now a lot of things out there say, hey, just whatever, and we'll just kind of do, and that sometimes does not always lead to there being an intentional process of moving a person from point A to point B, and I think a tool is very helpful in that.
I agree.
And then another thing, and it's something that we're super passionate about too in all of this, is training.
Right.
And in helping churches, again, not that we're experts, but just helping churches as they're saying, hey, we want to create a culture of disciple making. We are more than willing and want to come alongside and help provide some training.
Yeah. Tools and training are key. And, I've been doing this in a local church setting for 29 years. You've been doing it for just about the same amount of time. And here's what I can tell you, is that when it comes to helping the church to become a disciple-making church, there is not a surplus of resources available.
Right.
There is not. And so one of the things we've become very committed to and we're very passionate about is over and above what we do here at Crossroads, we're trying to help other churches. Churches do not just automatically become disciple-making churches. You've got to move from a non-disciple-making church to a disciple-making church, and that takes some figuring out,
some training and coaching and
absolutely.
Consulting,
right.
and man, we would love the
Well,
opportunity.
we've got a number of churches right now. In fact, I was just with a church this past weekend where we love to come in and to provide a day of training with some follow-up coaching and some consulting and that kind of thing. So if anybody's interested or knows of anybody who would be interested in us coming out and helping do some coaching and training, we would love to do that. And we have a whole team of guys that are trained to do that. So all they got to do is contact us at impactdisciples.com.
That's great. Well, again, thank you for taking the time to be with us this morning. And again, we want to encourage you to go on and like us on Facebook and let us know how helpful this maybe was, or even questions that you might have that we can even try to answer as we're doing each and every one of these trainings on a monthly basis. So great to see you again, and thank you for being with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month.